Have you ever heard of the ceiling marbles? Late at night, when everything is dead silent, you suddenly hear the sharp, distinct sound of glass marbles dropping onto the floor above you. People always debate why it happens, but the discussions always end up tracking into something creepy. I actually covered a case like this back when I was a beat reporter. At the Spring River Apartments, Building 14, multiple tenants had filed complaints with management about hearing late-night marble sounds. It was giving everyone the creeps. The weirdest part? Most residents in Building 14 were single professionals. There wasn't a single kid living in the building, let alone anyone playing with marbles. The guy who lost his mind over it the most was a tenant named Ethan. When he told me his story, his hands were shaking. His pupils were blown, and he kept twitching, scanning the room like a paranoid tweaker. Even the slight click of my pen hitting the desk made him jump straight out of his chair. Are you sure it's not just a neighbor dropping something, and your mind is playing tricks on you? I asked, trying to chill him out. Instead of calming down, Ethan's eyes went completely wild with terror. His voice cracked as he whispered, "Dude, I live on the top floor." Ethan told me the sound started 6 months ago. Later, when he talked to his neighbors, he found out they were all hearing it too. What does it sound like exactly? Walk me through it, I pressed. Ethan stared into space for a second. It's sharp. It has a rhythm. And it comes straight from the ceiling. First, there's a loud thud, like a heavy glass marble dropping dead onto the concrete. Then it bounces. Click, 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 each time softer and faster, exactly like a marble losing momentum. Are you absolutely certain it's a marble? Since I hadn't heard it myself, my reporter instincts made me skeptical. Ethan snapped back instantly, saying he grew up playing with marbles and could recognize that exact frequency anywhere. Plus, the other tenants agreed. The residents of Building 14 had held a meeting about it, and everyone swore it was the exact same sound. Wait. The others? You guys live on different floors. How is everyone hearing the exact same thing? I asked, catching a major loophole. That's what screwed with our heads, Ethan said, sweat starting to bead on his forehead. It started with old Mrs. Davis on the first floor. She's got terrible insomnia, and the noise was driving her crazy. She went up to the second floor to scream at the young newlyweds. But they've only been married 3 months, no kids. And get this, they were hearing it too. So the 3 of them went up to the 3rd floor, and it just kept going, floor by floor. Every single person was hearing it from their ceiling. All the way up to my place. And I hear it too. Ethan's eyes went blank, his forehead dripping with sweat. He was spiraling. Hey, Ethan, take a breath. I'm here to help, I said, putting my notebook down. You said you hear it too. But you look completely terrified. Why? Did you not look at the door when you walked in? I'm in apartment 704. I'm on the freaking top floor. Above me is just the roof deck. It's completely empty. When I first moved in, I wanted to grow some tomatoes up there, but the roof door is chained and padlocked. Nobody can get up there. So you tell me, man, what the hell is playing marbles on my ceiling? So you think it's paranormal? I don't know, Ethan rattled, his voice dropping to a whisper. But I heard someone died in Building 14 a few years back. A death? My posture straightened instantly. If there was a body involved, this wasn't just some quirky local interest piece anymore. This was a front-page story. What kind of death? Tell me everything, I demanded. Ethan swallowed hard. I don't know the specifics. Everyone in the building moved in over the last few years. But word is, Building 14 had a full-on religious cleansing ritual done years ago. Come on, if it wasn't haunted, why would the landlord hire a priest to purge the place? I jotted that down rapidly. Have you talked to the property management about this? What did they say? The mention of management turned Ethan's fear into pure rage. That manager, Mr. Wu? Total scumbag. He does nothing but give us the runaround. We told him flat out, either management pays for an exorcism to clear out whatever ghost is stuck here, or we stop paying our HOA fees. By now, I had a solid grasp of the situation, but something felt off. Ethan didn't seem like a liar, and the other residents backed up the noise complaints. It sounded like a classic ghost story, especially with a tragic death tied to it. But I don't believe in ghosts. There had to be a logical explanation. More importantly, my gut told me that while Ethan wasn't lying, he was definitely hiding something. Chapter 2. The second I stepped out of Building 14, a young guy in a cheap suit intercepted me. He looked like he'd been vaping by the entrance for an hour. You must be reporter Alex from the Daily News. Man, thanks for coming out all this way. I blinked, taking a step back. And you are? I'm the property manager here, Mr. Wu. Just call me Wu, he smiled warmly, immediately grabbing my arm and steering me toward the exit, blocking my path back to the building. Look, it's getting close to dinner time. Let me treat you to a nice steak at the place right across the street. Hold on, I said, snapping my wrist back. I caught his hand right as it was sliding a very thick, heavy paper envelope into my jacket pocket. I gave him a cold, knowing smirk. Mr. Wu, let's not do this. My paper has a strict zero-tolerance policy for bribes. Wu's face instantly went pale, his fake smile collapsing. Look, Alex, please, give me a break here. If this story hits the morning papers, I'm fired on the spot. If the envelope is too light, just name your price. I almost laughed at how desperate he was. Where do you guys even learn this stuff? Chill out. All I want is an honest interview. I'll report the absolute truth, and if management isn't at fault, I won't drag your name. Deal? Wu muttered under his breath, the internet says all reporters take bribes. I cleared my throat, slightly embarrassed. The industry definitely had its bad apples, so I couldn't even argue. I pushed him toward his office so we could talk away from whispering tenants. The moment the office door shut, I went straight for the throat. All right, Wu, let's cut the crap. You know exactly what the tenants are complaining about. What's the real story? Wu immediately stood up straight, shifting into corporate PR mode. The management team takes all tenant feedback with the utmost urgency. We immediately deployed a task force to the site, operating under the core principle of community service, stop. Cut the corporate speak, or I'll include the attempted bribe in my headline, I said, waving my hand to cut him off. Give me facts. Wu coughed awkwardly, dropping the act. Fine. Look, Building 14 is an older structure. 7 floors. It's true, every floor has complained about the marble sounds. But we did a full audit. There are literally 0 kids living in that entire block. It's physically impossible for someone to be playing marbles. We actually think it's just thermal expansion and contraction in the water pipes. Mr. Wu, I was a journalism major, but even I know water only expands like that when it freezes. It's barely autumn. It's nowhere near freezing. Plus, the pipes run through the kitchens and bathrooms, but tenants are hearing this directly above their beds, I said, raising an eyebrow. Well, it could be something else. We've contacted a structural specialist to take a look. Ethan told me someone died in Building 14 about 7 years ago, and that the roof has been welded shut ever since. Care to explain? Alex, come on, you can't believe neighborhood gossip. Oh God, stop looking at me like that, you're stressing me out, Wu said, wiping a sudden sheet of sweat from his forehead. Fine. I'll give it to you straight. Yeah, 7 years ago, a young woman in her 20s jumped off the roof of Building 14. I wasn't even working here yet. The old manager was terrified of bad PR and hired some priest to do a cleansing ritual to quiet the rumors. But I swear to you, that has absolutely nothing to do with the noise. He sounded so incredibly sure of himself that it caught my attention. How can you be so certain? Wu rolled his eyes and shrugged. Bro, it was a 20-something girl who went through a bad breakup and ended it all. Even if she came back as a ghost, why would she be playing with kids' marbles? That's little boy ghost stuff, right? Wu sighed, looking at me pleadingly. Seriously, Alex, please don't blow this out of proportion in your article. I didn't promise anything. I just stared into his eyes for a long moment, then patted his shoulder. I can only guarantee that every word I write will be backed by facts. I don't take sides. But as I walked away, a weird thought hit me. Why did I feel like Wu was hiding something big too? I didn't have any proof, and I didn't have a third-party source to double-check the facts, so I had to leave it at that for the day. Before leaving the complex, I interviewed a few random residents on the sidewalks. Most barely remembered the ritual from 7 years ago, and nobody outside of Building 14 had ever heard the marble sounds. Realizing I was hitting a wall, I packed up my gear and went back to the newsroom. That night, I cleaned up my notes and typed up a brief, generic piece for the morning edition. I'm a reporter, not a cop or a detective. My job is just to document what people say, not solve mysteries. The article was filed under the Weird Local Mysteries column, keeping it light. To avoid any issues with the legal editors, I barely even mentioned the suicide from 7 years ago. Chapter 3. At 5:45 a.m., my phone blasted an obnoxious ringtone right next to my ear. Screw me, it's not even 6 o'clock. I growled, fumbling to hit accept on an unknown number. Alex. It changed. It changed. The voice on the other end was frantic, buzzing with pure panic. It's not the marbles anymore. My brain was still half asleep. It took me a solid 10 seconds to realize it was Ethan from apartment 704. I had given him my business card yesterday. The marbles stopped? Great. Problem solved. Go back to sleep, I muttered, yawning and ready to hang up. No, you don't get it. It didn't stop, it evolved. Ethan's voice was trembling so violently I could hear his teeth chattering. Now it sounds like a woman walking around in high heels. A woman? My eyes snapped wide open. My mind instantly flashed back to what Wu had told me yesterday afternoon. The jumper from 7 years ago was a young woman. Was this actually connected? I threw on some clothes and tore over to the Spring River Apartments. It was just past 7 a.m., but a massive crowd had already gathered at the base of Building 14. The tenants looked exhausted and completely terrified. They had clearly stayed up all night. I put myself in their shoes for a second and felt a chill crawl down my spine. Imagine it's 3 a.m. You're lying in bed, staring at the dark ceiling, waiting to drift off. Suddenly, clack, clack, clack. The marble sound starts, like a creepy kid playing right above your head, stopping right over your bed to look down at you. Then, a second later, the sharp, heavy thud-thud-thud of high heels echoes across the concrete. You picture a faceless woman walking up to the kid, both of them staring down through the ceiling straight at you, and then you remember you're on the top floor and the roof is completely abandoned. I shuddered. Ahead of me, the tenants were screaming at Wu. We did the math. The girl who jumped 7 years ago is back. She's in the building. You didn't disclose a suicide when we signed our leases. We want a full refund on our down payments. Refund. Refund. Wu was sweating through his shirt, desperately throwing his hands up. Please, calm down. Stop spreading conspiracy theories. We're just the property management company, we don't own the property. If you want a refund, go sue the developer. He was losing his temper too. Ethan spotted me in the crowd and ran over, grabbing my sleeve. Alex. We're just normal working class people. Management is trying to crush us. We need the media to expose this. Honestly, this story was getting juicy. Whether it was a hoax or something supernatural, this kind of dramatic escalation was pure clickbait. It was absolutely worth my time. Ethan turned back to the crowd, whispering with a few vocal tenants before turning to Wu. We still think the building is haunted. We demand that management pays for a high-profile medium to come cleanse the block right now. Wu was so stressed he was about to nod just to make them shut up, but I stepped in and blocked him. Are you kidding me? If they hold a fake psychic ritual, my serious news piece turns into a joke. I couldn't let that happen. Everyone, let's hold on, I said, addressing the crowd. Supernatural stuff aside, our top priority should be finding the physical source of the noise. Since everyone thinks this links back to the tragedy 7 years ago, I suggest management unwelds the roof door right now and lets us inspect the scene. The tenants roared in agreement. Wu let out a miserable groan. Guys, the police literally ordered that iron door to be welded shut back then because it was a safety hazard. If we want to break it open, I have to file paperwork with the local precinct. It takes days. Hearing this, the tenants boiled over. A few big guys rolled up their sleeves like they were ready to riot. Wu immediately raised his hands in surrender, promising he would run to the police station to get the permit approved today. I had other assignments scheduled for the day, so after a few more quick words with Ethan, I left, telling them to call me the second the roof door was ready to be opened. Chapter 4. 2 days later, around noon, Wu called me. I bolted over and made it to the top floor right before they broke the seal. The narrow stairwell was packed. Wu and Ethan stood right at the front, guarding a locksmith who was holding a heavy-duty circular saw. Right in front of them was the infamous rusted iron door leading to the roof. Spark, the saw bit into the final metal weld. The moment the lock snapped, Ethan stepped forward and delivered a brutal kick, slamming the heavy iron door open. The tenants surged forward, spilling out onto the open roof deck. I kept my distance, walking out last. The roof was covered in years of thick dust, dead leaves, and dirt. A few old utility pipes ran across the concrete, completely rusted out and decaying. But other than the filth, there was absolutely nothing out of the ordinary. Where is it? Where did she jump from? People muttered, looking over the ledges. Wu shrugged. Don't look at me. I wasn't here. You'd have to ask the guy who had my job back then. The crowd spent an hour tearing the roof apart, looking for anything suspicious. They found no marbles, no high heels, and no ghosts. One by one, looking totally defeated, the tenants trudged back downstairs. Wu was the last to leave. He pulled the door shut, snapped a brand new heavy padlock onto the latch, dusted off his suit jacket, and shook his head with a bitter laugh. I frowned. Was this story really going to end with a boring whimper? I wasn't satisfied. I pulled Wu and Ethan aside separately afterward. I still felt like both of them were keeping secrets, and if I pushed hard enough, I could break the story open. But both of them locked down. They swore on their lives they were telling me everything. Without proof, I had to drop it. I had a few contacts down at the local police precinct. I thought about asking them to pull the case file from 7 years ago, but I ultimately decided against it. It wasn't worth burning a favor for a minor local noise complaint. I guess this was the end of the road for the story. 2 days later, I drove back to the Spring River Apartments for one final follow-up before closing the file. But when I got there, Ethan and the rest of the tenants gave me a shocking update: the noises had completely stopped. Just like that? It's gone? I asked, completely blindsided. That makes zero sense. Turns out it really was just thermal expansion, Wu said, walking out of the office with a smug look on his face. We flushed and tightened the plumbing infrastructure inside the walls, and the issue resolved itself. Sorry for making you waste your time, Alex. Yeah, now that it's gone, the cause doesn't really matter anyway, Ethan added, actually agreeing with Wu for once in his life. Thanks for looking out for us, man. I'll make sure the tenants send a nice thank you plaque to your newsroom. Something was incredibly off. Both of them refused to make eye contact with me, and I caught them trading quick, nervous glances. But since every single tenant now echoed the exact same story, desperate to sweep it under the rug, I had zero leverage to force them to talk. Any other reporter would have taken the win, accepted the thank you plaque, and moved on. But I'm stubborn. I was fully prepared to let this go, but their obvious lying completely triggered my competitive drive. What was this? Were they playing me? Using a city reporter for leverage against each other and then tossing me out when they settled it? No way. I was going to find out the truth. Wu escorted me all the way to the main gate of the complex. I pretended to drive away, but the second his car cleared the parking lot, I doubled back and slipped into the security guard shack by the gate. Inside was a heavy-set, middle-aged security guard. Hey man, I said, sliding a premium cigarette across the desk to him. The tenants were screaming bloody murder 2 days ago, and now suddenly everyone is totally fine? Is the noise really gone? The guard didn't know anything about my complicated relationship with Wu. He saw Wu treating me with respect earlier, so he assumed I was an official VIP. He took the cigarette, lit it, and snorted. Gone? Hell no. It's getting worse. Word is the people in that building are terrified to even close their eyes at night. Bingo. I clenched my fist in victory but kept my face completely neutral. Then why did everyone suddenly change their tune today? Ha! The guard slapped his knee. Because of that news article some reporter published 2 days ago. Now everyone in the neighborhood knows Building 14 is cursed. No one wants to rent an apartment there, and property values are cratering. The landlords and owners are losing their minds. Even if they're terrified at night, they have to fake it and shut up. A creepy noise won't kill them, but losing their life savings will. I almost laughed out loud. That was it? Economic panic? Fine, if it was just about property values, there really wasn't a story here anymore. Why ruin these people's lives over a noisy pipe? Thanks for clearing that up, brother, I said, turning to leave. The guard waved his hand proudly. Anytime. I've been the night guard here for 10 years. There isn't a single piece of dirty laundry in Spring River I don't know about. I froze. A second later, a spark ignited in my brain. I turned around and slid him another cigarette. Then, do you know anything about the girl who committed suicide from Building 14 7 years ago? The guard took a deep drag, leaned in close, and dropped his voice to a whisper. Oh, that story is crazy. That poor girl? She didn't even live in Building 14. What? The suicide victim wasn't a tenant? Then why did she choose Building 14 to end her life? I pressed, my heart hammering against my ribs. The investigation was breaking wide open. It was a messy affair, you feel me? The guard smirked, love triangle gossip written all over his face. When I nodded, he continued satisfies. Nobody else knows this, but her secret boyfriend was the property manager back then. The bastard was married with 2 kids. He sweet-talked her into his bed, got her pregnant, and then refused to leave his wife. The poor girl snapped and jumped. And that whole thing about him hiring a priest because he was worried about bad luck? Total bull. The guy did it because his conscience was eating him alive. Unbelievable. That was what Wu had been hiding from me. Even though it happened years ago, the death was directly tied to the management company. If that hit the press, the company would face a PR nightmare and lawsuits. What about the cops? Did they arrest the old manager? I asked, frowning. The guard shook his head. Being a cheating scumbag isn't illegal, man. The girl jumped on her own terms. You can't charge him with murder for that. He lost his job though, packed his bags, and moved back to his small town in disgrace. Great. I had uncovered a massive, dark piece of historical gossip, which meant absolutely nothing for my current story. Digging up a 7-year-old affair didn't explain the marble sounds the tenants were hearing today. My investigation had completely derailed. I cursed myself internally, said goodbye to the guard, and left the complex. It was time to kill the story. As a final formality, I visited a top structural engineer at the State University to get a scientific explanation for the noises. You know the drill, it's never a ghost, it's always just physics. The expert didn't disappoint. He gave me an instant answer: it's structural concrete mold. Wait, what? The floor slabs between apartments are made of reinforced concrete, the professor explained, drawing a diagram on his whiteboard. When the concrete is poured, gravity pulls the wet cement down, causing the inner steel rebar to bend slightly. This creates intense, latent physical stress inside the slab. In a normal building, the hardened concrete locks the rebar in place, holding that stress. But over decades, if a specific type of predatory mold grows inside the slab, it eats away at the concrete matrix. Small hollow pockets form around the rebar. When the structural stress overcomes the weakened concrete, the steel rod snaps back and forth inside the hollow pocket like a guitar string, producing a sound identical to a dropping glass marble. Then why did it change into the sound of high heels? I asked, leaning in. Because as the rebar continues to snap and the mold spreads, the hollow pocket expands into a long, empty tunnel. The steel rod stops bouncing rapidly and starts sliding and thudding along the interior of the wider tunnel, creating a heavy, rhythmic shifting sound. To the human ear, it sounds exactly like someone walking in heels. The science was flawless. It answered everything perfectly. Except for one terrifying detail that the professor couldn't answer, which lingered in the back of my mind. Inside a dark, sealed slab of dry industrial concrete, completely cut off from moisture and nutrients, what the hell was that mold feeding on to grow so massive? Chapter 5. A few days later, Ethan's promised thank you plaque arrived at the newsroom. It was signed by the residents of Building 14. I glanced over the names carelessly, but something caught my eye. My coworkers started gathering around to congratulate me, so feeling awkward, I quickly shoved it into my desk drawer. It wasn't until I got home that night that I took the plaque out and examined it line by line. Sure enough, there was a glaring error. Building 14 had 7 floors, with 4 apartments per floor. That's 28 units in total. But the plaque only had 27 signatures. The name for apartment 703 was missing. I remembered Ethan shifting his words from every single tenant to most tenants during our second talk. And come to think of it, I had never seen anyone from 703 at the community meetings. Did the people in 703 simply not hear the noises? The article was already printed, and I was supposed to be moving on to a new assignment. But as I lay in bed that night, I was tossing and turning, completely unable to sleep. The mystery was clawing at my brain, and images of the girl jumping 7 years ago kept flashing before my eyes. I started sweating, and in the silence of my own apartment, I could swear I heard a faint click-clack on my own ceiling. The moment a journalist loses their obsession with the truth, their career is dead. My old university professor's words echoed in my head. At 6 a.m., exhausted after staring at the wall all night, I threw off the covers and drove straight back to Spring River. I told myself, one last run. Whatever I find, I closed the book. I marched straight up to the 7th floor and banged heavily on the door of 703. Silence. I knocked for a straight 5 minutes. Finally, the door to 704 clicked open, and a tired Ethan peeked his head out. "Who the hell is knocking this early, Alex? What are you doing here again? Who lives in 703? I demanded, turning on him. Why have they never shown up to a single meeting? I checked the property registration logs. This unit was sold years ago. Ethan's eyes darted away. Even as I pressed him, he kept trying to deflect. Nobody lives there, man. It's an empty investment property. Seriously. I let out a cold laugh, playing a dangerous bluff. Ethan, I think you're the one making those noises to tank the building's value so you can buy up the other units cheap. I have deep ties with the homicide detective squad downtown. If you don't talk to me right now, your next interview will be under fluorescent lights in an interrogation room. To make it real, I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts, showing him the names of several high-ranking police officers I'd interviewed for past crime beats. Ethan broke instantly. Sweat poured down his neck. Okay. Look, I skimmed some money and took advantage of a situation, but I swear to God I have nothing to do with any noises. He dragged me into his master bedroom and hauled away a massive, heavy wooden wardrobe leaning against the shared wall. Behind it was a massive, jagged hole knocked straight through the drywall and brick. 703 and 704 share this structural partition, Ethan stammered, tears forming in his eyes. When I moved in, I wanted to expand my closet space, but I accidentally broke through the wall. I knew I'd face a massive fine from the city for unpermitted structural changes, so I wanted to settle it privately with whoever owned 703. But a whole year passed and nobody ever came. Eventually, I couldn't help myself. I crawled through the hole to check it out. The place was abandoned, but there were some high-end diamond necklaces and rings sitting on the vanity. I took them. He was practically begging now. Alex, please. I haven't even sold the jewelry yet. I'll put it all back today, I swear. Just please don't call the cops. I stared at the hole, completely ignoring his begging. A standard renovation mistake doesn't just breach a solid structural partition wall unless the brickwork was already incredibly weak and degraded. And more importantly, if 703 had been abandoned for 7 years, where did a fresh set of expensive women's jewelry come from? After a moment of intense calculation, I walked downstairs and dragged Wu up to the room, demanding he witness the breach. Even though the hole was big enough for an adult to crawl through, entering a private home without property management present was breaking and entering. I'm a reporter, not a criminal. I wasn't taking that legal hit. Wu looked like he was going to faint when he saw the hole. He glared daggers at Ethan, then squeezed through the opening into 703 first. The apartment was thick with dust and choked with a foul, heavy stench. The structural integrity of the wall and floor has been compromised, Wu said, his voice cracking as he inspected the dark bedroom. Oh Jesus, this is bad. He immediately pulled out his radio and called up 3 heavy-set security guards. I watched from the hole as Wu ordered the guards to take sledgehammers and pickaxes to the cracked concrete floor slab right beneath the partition wall. Crack. BAM, the heavy iron tools smashed into the concrete. Shards of cement and clouds of gray dust exploded into the air. As the dust slowly cleared, the guards stopped swinging. Everyone froze, dead silent. Embedded deep inside the crushed concrete slab was a small, tightly wrapped, mummified black mass. A thick, fuzzy layer of industrial black mold completely blanketed the object, its roots spreading out like a web along the inner steel rebar, extending deep into the structural core of the entire building. The mass was horribly decayed, but through the black mold, the unmistakable shape of tiny human limbs was clearly visible. It was the skeleton of an infant. A human body, the ultimate biological nutrient paste for structural mold to feast on for 7 years. With the engineer's theory applied, the mystery of the marble sounds was completely solved. But the mystery of the noise didn't matter anymore. This was a crime scene. Chapter 6. I called 911 immediately. Once the detectives secured the perimeter and escorted Ethan away in handcuffs for grand larceny, a pale Wu finally confessed the final piece of the puzzle. This apartment, 703, was purchased 7 years ago by the old property manager, Wu whispered, leaning against the police cruiser. The guy who had affairs. I had no idea he was this sick. The former manager had moved back to his rural hometown, but with his identity confirmed, the state police picked him up within 6 hours. The bastard probably thought his secret was safe forever, never imagining that a microscopic speck of mold would expose his crime. A few days later, I checked in with my contact at the precinct to get an update on the interrogation. The case is a mess, the detective sighed over the phone. 7 years ago, the girl jumped in broad daylight in front of dozens of witnesses, and the manager had an ironclad alibi at the time of her death, so he was never a suspect. The medical examiner back then noted signs of recent childbirth on her body, but the manager told everyone she had suffered a late-stage miscarriage a month prior. Everyone assumed the grief of losing the baby drove her to jump. But the interrogation today revealed the real horror. The manager was terrified his wife would find out about the pregnancy, so he locked the pregnant girl inside his secret apartment, Unit 703, for months. During labor, he refused to take her to a hospital to avoid a paper trail. The baby died during a brutal breech birth, and the girl, shattered by the trauma, broke out and jumped off the roof the next day. To cover his tracks, the manager used the excuse of renovating his unit that weekend to bury the infant's body directly inside the concrete floor matrix. So he's going down for murder? I asked, my blood boiling. The detective let out a long, frustrated sigh. We can't prove it, Alex. We suspect he might have intentionally suffocated the infant, but after 7 years in concrete, the remains are completely skeletonized. There's zero soft tissue left to determine a cause of death. The chain of evidence is broken. So he just gets to walk away? I shouted into the receiver. We're doing our best, man, but legally, our hands are tied. I slammed the phone down. I sat in the dark newsroom for a long time, then opened my laptop and completely tore up my previous draft. If the legal system couldn't touch him, I would let public opinion destroy him. When the expose hit the front page the next morning, it caused an absolute media firestorm. The public was outraged, demanding blood. Faced with massive public pressure, the DA tried to rush a grand jury indictment for abuse of a corpse, but the statute of limitations for that specific charge had expired 2 years ago. Despite the online riots, the old manager was legally released and walked out of the courthouse a free man. I was furious, but there was nothing left to do. But the moment I walked back into the daily newsroom, the chief editor called me into his private office. His face was dead serious. Alex, the chief said, closing the door. Your latest piece just triggered a massive crisis. The Spring River HOA and every single resident of Building 14 just filed a joint formal complaint against you for defamation and spreading fake news. The letter went straight to the mayor's office. Are you insane? I gasped. I solved their ghost problem. They literally sent me a thank you plaque last week. Why the hell are they stabbing me in the back? I drove straight back to Spring River, but the moment I stepped out of my car, Ethan's neighbors surrounded me, their faces twisted with hatred. You scumbag. You ruined our lives with your trash articles. Reporters are just vultures. You prey on regular people. There was never any noise. You fabricated the whole thing. You're going to hell for this. Not a single person mentioned the dead baby. Ethan's family had already boarded up the wardrobe hole and denied it ever existed. I stood there, completely lost. As a few of the younger guys started crowding my space, looking like they wanted to break my camera, I turned around and fled. At the main gate, I saw the middle-aged night guard sitting outside his shack. I ran up to him, catching my breath. "Brother, please. I'm never coming back here again, but you have to tell me. Why are they doing this?" The guard looked around nervously, sighed, and took a drag of his cigarette. "Alex, because of your front-page article, the whole state knows Building 14 had a dead baby buried in the floorboards. Property values for the entire complex just dropped by 35% overnight." The truth hit me like a physical punch to the gut. To these homeowners, their property value was their life. By exposing the truth, I had wiped out hundreds of thousands of dollars of their net worth. To them, I was a monster. But what about the innocent baby? Did he deserve to rot inside a block of concrete for another 30 years just so their real estate portfolios wouldn't drop? Those marble sounds, those sharp, desperate echoes at night, they weren't a curse. They were the baby's only way of screaming for help. Was I right to expose it, or did I just ruin 27 families for nothing? For the first time in my career, my journalism ideals felt completely hollow. The wind of reality extinguishes the fire of idealism faster than any winter snow. When I walked back into the newsroom, the chief editor handed me a transfer slip. "Alex, the board met this afternoon. We think it's best if you step away from the daily investigative beat for a while." I stared at the paper, numbness washing over me. "Chief, I've given years to this paper. Because of one corporate complaint, you're firing me?" "Nobody is firing you," the chief said softly, avoiding my eyes. "We just need you to lay low." The parent media conglomerate owns a small niche trash tabloid called Urban Legends Monthly. They cover UFO sightings, haunted houses, and cryptids. Their chief writer just quit, and the magazine is bleeding money. We want to drop you in there as their lead investigative editor. The pay stays the same. Stay there for a year until the heat dies down, and I'll pull you back. I let out a hollow, bitter laugh. I knew Urban Legends Monthly. Its sales were a joke, and it was on the verge of being shut down permanently. In fact, during the budget meeting last winter, I had personally voted yes on a proposal to liquidate their entire staff. Talk about karma. I packed my notebook and camera into a cardboard box. I didn't bother arguing. Whatever. Starting next Monday, I guess I'm the lead reporter for a ghost tabloid.